So last year I did a video similar to this, but it was more about the elves and the fae, whereas this video I want to do one more about the dwarfs, or as they call Duga, and really getting to the point that dwarfs and Svartalfs are not the same thing. And I discussed this in a previous video. Many scholars of the Eddas like to make out that they are the same thing, but they're not. This is a complete misinterpretation, and a lot of these scholars of the Eddas aren't practicing shamans or saver, or don't do actually any magical work, so they're just looking at it from a very academic point of view and can't really distinguish the connection because of certain etymologies. But the Eddas, as far as I know, are very much distorted, and certain pieces of the puzzle haven't been put together. You've got to remember that the Eddas are also distorted, but they're also 0.1% of what our ancestors knew. And the way to actually, like I said, really get back to the way our ancestors viewed the world is going through the blood. And the reason why many people don't want to do this is because they think that connecting the spiritual with the material is a paradigm that is long lost there in consciousness. And a lot of these academics don't even believe in any of this, or actually, no, I wouldn't even say believe, they don't even know that any of this stuff is real. They just think it's what, our ancestors' delusions were. So I'm going to read out what it says about the dwarfs in this book here. So, dwarfs are famous as Snow White's cuddly forest companions, but there's nothing dopey or silly about dwarfs. The fierce warrior dwarfs of J.R. Tolkien's Hobbit and Lord of the Rings series of novels are truer to form. Dwarfs are ancient primeval earth spirits, more likely to live within mountains, mines, or otherwise. Underground van messy little forest cottages. Some dwarfs live near trees, under great rocks, or even within rocks. Dwarfs are guardians of Earth's treasures and master craftsmen. They know occult secrets in general, as well as the mysteries of metals, gems, and minerals. Crystal healers may call on them in visualizations for advice and knowledge. Dwarfs are masters and teachers of smithcraft. They craft magical swords and magical jewelry. Dwarfs are frequently described as greedy, but they may simply be protective troves of treasure they have been entrusted to guard. Dwarfs are spirits of fertility and abundance. They heal and enhance personal fertility for humans as well as animals. Once upon a time, dwarfs were the subject of genuine veneration, although post-Christianity they were recast as demons, blamed for bringing disease and trouble. They are stubborn, proud spirits, and not likely to accept surreptitious veneration. Dwarfs are touchy and volatile. Always address them respectfully. They are elders of the earth. They are suspicious, cynical spirits who assume, possibly correctly, that others are always out to steal their treasure. If they can be persuaded otherwise, if you do not demonstrate acquisitive behavior, they can be exceptionally generous. They bestow knowledge and skill. Although they may not part with their own treasure, They have been known to craft special gifts for devotees. They know the secrets of healing. They can recognize illnesses modern medicine is unable to diagnose and can remedy infertility. Norse cosmology classifies dwarfs as dark or black elves. Dark or black refers to their dwelling place, not their appearance, although dwarfs of the mines are likely as covered with soot and grime as any other miner. Light elves live above ground in the sunlight. Dark elves or dwarfs spend their time in subterranean realms. They may be affiliated with the Vanir spirits. They crafted Freya's priceless necklace named Brisingmarmen. Dwarfs forged the treasures of the Aesir spirits, including Odin's magic spear and Thor's invincible hammer. So, in this book, it refers to them as dark elves, them being the same thing, but I heavily disagree with that. It was actually the dark elves, or the dark alpha, that invaded their realm, Nidvalir, and terraformed it into Svartalfheim. This led to them having to go on a diaspora exodus into other realms. This eventually resulted them in once manifesting here in Midgard, and this is where you have the Neanderthal man. The Neanderthal is a form of humanoid that existed here actually in Europe thousands of years ago, but it became extinct, and Europeans, especially those who have genetics in the British Isles, have actually 2% or even 3% of Neanderthal DNA. So the Neanderthals were a lot more stockier than us. They're a lot more shorter as well. The bones more thick, and they had a wider rib cage. And they were, I think they were actually even more physically more stronger than us in some ways. So this kind of gets to the point, really, that they did exist once here in Midgard because they had to come here because they were pushed out of their own homeworld. And they manifested here as the Neanderthal. And there's these very interesting, I've forgotten what island it is, but it's on one of the islands of Italy, where they have these structures, these megalithic structures, and which have holes dug into it, and they're crafted exceptionally well and precise as well. And I'm guessing, maybe I could be wrong here, but I'm guessing this is probably something they crafted. There's also the Jotuns, which also crafted other structures, but I'll get that into another video, and the Alpha as well. You see that the Alpha, the Jotuns, the Dwarfs, or the Duga, have all been here on Midgard at one point. Now they've retreated to their realms, but they can travel back here interdimensionally, but not for very long. What you've got to understand is that there's different types of Alpha and there's different types of Jotun. I think there's only one set of Dwarfs or Duga, but I'll go into Jotuns in another video because it gets into a whole. There's many different subtypes of Jotuns which actually were warring with one another here on Midgard at one point, and along with the Alpha. But they have more or less retreated back into their own realms, but like I said, can travel interdimensionally. It's very interesting what I actually think the Darkelves, another name for them, might be. And if you're familiar with Arabic folklore and mythology, you probably recognise this one. It's the Jinn. I'm going to read it out here. Jinn, are the indigenous spirits of the Middle East and North Africa. They preceded Judaism, Christianity, and Islam in the area, but have since travelled the world with Islam and are now found far from their original home. In Neil Gaiman's novel American Gods, a jinn is envisioned driving a taxi in New York City. There's no reason to think this far-fetched. Jinn is sometimes used to indicate both singular and plural, but in Morocco, jinn refers to an individual spirit. The plural is yonon. Jinn constitute a vast community of spirits. They come in all shapes and sizes and vary in power and temperament. Jinn have hierarchical societies that parallel those of humans. Thus, Kemhorak is a king of jinn. Some jinn are fascinated by people and behave very much like orishas. They can be benevolent protectors. Others just want to be left alone. The name jinn derives from Old Arabic and means covert or darkness. Most jinn are secretive, covert spirits who are invisible most of the time. Many are ambivalent towards people. They are nocturnal, preferring to sleep during the day. They haunt ruins, cemeteries, and crossroads. Blood appeals to them, and so they may be found in slaughterhouses. Jinn, like liminal spaces, they have a tendency to take up residence as the threshold of homes. It's crucial not to step on the threshold, but over it, and also never to throw anything on the ground without giving warning, especially liquids or waste products. Jinn who are rudely awakened tend to reflexively strike out. They cause illness, sudden stroke, or paralysis that will resist medical treatment, responding only to magical and shamanic cures. Some jinn are skilled shapeshifters and may appear in any form. Some jinn are consistently benevolent and are venerated and loved. Some jinn are consistently temperamental, treacherous, hostile, and malevolent, the very embodiment of evil spirits. People may proliferate them, but the motivation is fear. Jinn are spiritual devotees too. There are pagan, Jewish, Christian, and Islamic jinn. Each is allegedly most likely to help humans who share their religious persuasion, although the most generous jinn are kind to all, and the most malevolent are equal opportunity offenders. Jinn love and crave heat. They live in the desert, by hot springs and in bathhouses. They despise the cold, and jinn in colder climates tend to be grouchy. Jinn hate salt and fear iron and steel. All may be used to keep them far away. They don't like noisy, crowded places, although they are curious spirits and will will venture out to observe or even participate in fairs, markets, and festivals. Jinn enjoy stories and can be pacified or lured by telling exciting, suspenseful tales. They will hover quietly in corners and listen. In the manner of Scheherazade, should you need to keep a jinn calm or play for time, keep telling stories. If you anticipate dealings with jinn, it's not bad to maintain a repertory of tales just in case. Jinn have a code of honor. Even the most malevolent jinn will honor a promise or vow. Make sure that you do too. Jinn appreciate favors done for them and respectful behavior. Their manifestations. Jinn famously manifest as snakes, cats, or dogs. It's considered dangerous to injure, kill, even annoy any of these creatures. as it may be a jinn in disguise. So, I don't agree with everything that's just in that book about the jinn. It does make a lot of sense why the jinn would be the Dark Alpha. I could be wrong about this, but this is kind of where I'm getting at, because when the Alpha came to Midgard, the Light Alpha, who were trying to get back to the original Alpha, because obviously the Alpha split into the Light Alpha and the Dark Alpha when they were actually originally one. And the Light Alpha went up to northwestern Europe into the British Isles and Scandinavia and settled there, while the Dark Alpha went to the Middle Eastern region around Samaria and the Levant and Arabia. So this does then make a point, really, because if you look at actually depictions of the jinn, they do look very much like Alpha stereotypically. I mean, they have pointed ears, they have very narrow faces, very kind of piercing eyes, which is what the Alpha are usually portrayed as. And I think even what they look like when they had manifested into their here in Midgard, and from my own experiences of the Alpha, this is what they very much look like. And what I think the jinn also did was even create these so-called, what I've already explained, these monotheistic Abrahamic tesseract religions in order to control, and also infiltrated our own indigenous pagan spiritualities and turned them into corrupted, inverted versions in order to weaken our own indigenous ways of life, so that the Abrahamic imperialism could come in and overtopple them easily. So this kind of all is coming back to the connections now, because I can tell you something. The fire Jotun of Muspelheim also settled in the Middle Eastern region, and I think this has very much something to do with the Anunnaki, you know, the gods of Samaria. Now connect that with the jinn as well. In the Middle Eastern region, the fire Jotun, who's their dark lord, being Surt. Svartalfs are Surt's elves. Now it all makes sense. And the Light Alpha were actually allied at the time with the Frost Jotun, because the fire and ice were at war with one another. Now we can see this expressed in a different allegorical form in the quite famous TV show Game of Thrones, where you watch the novels which the Game of Thrones is based on is called Songs of Fire and Ice, and is about this battle between fire and ice, and you know, the war what is taking place. And this is why also the Middle East has been so predicated upon getting Europe and the West into Middle Eastern conflict as well. You see, this all relates to modern times, what we're in now, because this hasn't gone away. It's just taken on different forms with different, and merged itself with the current zeitgeists of each time. Obviously, it's not you know, giants and elves in their physical form manifesting here now in this time, because we live in a completely different world at the moment. but in our own consciousness this is going on, and this manifests in a completely different way according to the zeitgeist and world we're in now. So this is all very predicated stuff. I mean, what I'm getting into right now, I'm probably going to do more, videos of music in the background, me speaking over it, with like some images in it to kind of give a better explanation of all this. I just want to make a video like this because I haven't made a video in this style for a long time, and I kind of miss doing these kind of videos because they allow me to kind of ramble on a bit and about just stuff in general. But yeah, I mean, I find this all very connecting all now, because for a long time I couldn't connect like the terms and semantics from different regional cultures to my own, because I was stuck in this phase where I saw these things as very much disconnected. But now, as I, have more open my mind to this kind of stuff, because I did go through a more narrow-minded phase, and I think that was necessary in order for me to get more stuck into obviously my Capricorn is in Saturn, so that has a lot of effect on how I get quite narrow-minded at certain periods of time into certain subjects. But now I kind of have opened my mind a bit and kind of like matching terms and semantics from other cultures and trying to like pin this all together to see how, how something like the dark elf from my own ancestral tongue relates to the jinn, which is from more the Semitic Arabic tongue. But the point is that, this does expand very far, and to completely ignore that these different tribes, races, and regions didn't have absolutely any contact with one another up until a certain time is absolute bullshit. There was a lot more happening than just, humans in their isolated area, different tribes in their isolated areas having no contact with each other. That there was a lot more going on, and history likes to suggest that it's just all something just came out of the Middle East, and well, it did effectively, but what was going on in the other parts of the world at that time? It doesn't say anything. It just says, starts with Samaria rising up and spreads out there from there into Europe and the rest of the world. And that's that is one part of history, yes. But the fact is that's showing what the ones who rule over us, only their narrow mind of history is. And telling it from their subjective perspective. You see, they like you to believe that the greatest civilization, or the birth or the cradle of civilization, was in Mesopotamia and Samaria. But there was other civilizations around. There's a civilization in Europe. The Indo-Europeans came in and they created a civilization in Europe. The Aesir race, as I like to call them. They are the Aesir, the Indo-Europeans. And this is something they don't tell you about. And they like to tell you that before Christianity, all these Northern European tribes were just 2 steps away from the cavemen, and that they struggled to put a cart together or something. This is absolute fucking ridiculous and bullshit. It's all Roman propaganda. And if people actually only kind of looked in with themselves, actually started to fucking more believe in themselves and look into their blood instead of what fucking some pompous academics or mainstream historians say is the divine truth. Well, it's actually not true. They don't even say it's divine truth, because nothing about their so-called truth what is divine. They're just going by outdated historical research, which can easily be, you know, if only people looked in for themselves, can easily just be falsified. I'm not saying it's all not true, but a lot of it is kind of bullshit in terms of how they kind of want you to think the timeline of history is. They present to you a false timeline, basically a timeline that was passed down by the Vatican in the 1500s for basically the so-called, I don't know what they call us, the goyams that they like to call us, can just, absorb and into our minds and believe this is all true. And they don't want you looking into their blood. They don't want you to look into their blood. They don't want you looking into your melanin. And that's the whole truth of the matter. They don't want you to believe in your fucking self. And they want you to say, well, because, this has been written down by, an expert in this field, that it must be true. And, it's just fucking so, it's just bullshit. I mean, all the mainstream garbage that comes out these days, I just can't fucking stand it anymore. It's so just arrogant and pompous and just so has absolutely no understanding of looking at this from a more metaphysical perspective. So they kind of all try to base this on material advancements of how we've developed throughout history, and that they see like now in the Enlightenment era, the last 200 years, we've been at the peak of material advancement. They think that's the actually advancement of human evolution. When they cancel out the metaphysical advancements. We haven't had much metaphysical advance. Well, we have in the underground in the last 200 years, but in the mainstream, none at all. It's actually gone downhill. More of, and then you get some people who will argue that that's because we got rid of Christian theocracy and the church power and stuff like that. But that's I think is more the root cause of actually what made this go down in many ways, because it's that the Abrahamic religions are very narrow-minded way of viewing the world, and it's not relative for the European mind. I don't think it's even relative for the other races of mankind. The only people these Semitic Abrahamic religions are for are desert tribes in the Middle East, because it's all about wandering in the desert. I mean, what the fuck has that got to do with anyone if you're living in the northern part of Europe? I mean, it doesn't have anything to do. It's just this. It doesn't relate at all. I try to get my head into it and read it at one point, and I couldn't get my fucking head around it, because it was just going off in this world I couldn't relate to. And I mean, I've gone on a bit of a rant there about certain things, but more importantly than that, I mean, the fact that people, we don't like, the obviously the anthropological scientific studies like to cancel out. They're not going to accept, theories about giants and dwarfs and elves, because they just see that as all absolute fantasy, when actually you got to think, why did they label that stuff fantasy in the first place? It's reverse psychology. It's to get you to think that's all fucking fantasy. But really, it's actually the truth about this reality. They get you to think all the stuff they put in all these fantasy novels as fantasy, because they then you just write it off as fantasy instead of going, actually, hang on. Isn't there actually some truth to this? And I can remember as, when I was, a lot younger in my younger days, really being into Lord of the Rings and Tolkien, reading it, and I kind of always knew there was some, truth to all of this. But this, maybe it might have not been presented in accuracy, but that this is a history of what was going on here in Midgard, and even what's going on here now at the moment. You see all these different races: the giants, the elves, the dwarfs, the Vanir, the Aesir, are all within us because we have absorbed all their genetics over time. That's what the Homo sapien is. It's an absorption of all the forms of humanoids. Humanoid, meaning that it's humanoid in its basic shape, and we've absorbed all of that into us. And you could argue, people might think that's absolutely crazy to believe, but if you think about it, actually, the fact that we have 2 or 3% Neanderthal DNA, what the fuck else do we also have in us? And it was an absorption of that. The Indo-Europeans were the Aesir. They came into Europe. There was actually another. The Vanir were actually in Europe before that, and this gets into the people who are in Europe before were the Vanir, and the Aesir from the Caucasus Mountains. The Indo-Europeans came in and basically bred with the Vanir, and this is the story of how the Aesir and the Vanir formed an alliance. There was wars between them, and there's still wars going on within us because certain things haven't been resolved, and both parties made mistakes. And so you also got the Alpha, the Jotuns, like I just mentioned. The fact that they find, skeletons of giants every so often, and they take photographs of them. And these photographs go missing. These giant skeletons go completely missing afterwards. They don't want you to find this out. This is all very, kept under the cover stuff. And and a lot of people, in the alternative research community will point to the Anunnaki, but, yes, that's all well and good when you're discussing it from a Mesopotamian mythology, but, what were the Anunnaki? What did we call the Anunnaki, our people? Well, from my perspective, they were a faction of the Jotuns. And then you get all this other stuff like the Sasquatch, for example. I mean, what is that? I mean, I know that there's different tribes of wild wood Ettins, and one of them is the bear tribe, which, look kind of like half man, half bear. And I think that might be the Sasquatch. And all these different, cryptoids, you see, the Mothman, for example, all these different stuff. There are all these the reason why they're so hard to find physical evidence for them is because they're very good at not leaving their tracks behind, because obviously they travel interdimensionally, so they come here, they settle here a bit, but they have trouble with adapting to the density of this realm. So they don't like becoming too dense, because if they stay here for longer, then they have to cope and adapt to that density, and that density is too harsh for them because they've been in their own realm for so long where it isn't as dense. Midgard is a very dense realm. It's very hard to survive within the realm of Midgard. It's probably the hardest realm to survive in. That's why you come here for soul evolution, because it's a challenge. Whereas in other realms, some are more harder than others and stuff like that, but Midgard is really the center realm where all these worlds collide, and that's where you see a hybridization of all these different worlds here. If you go into the other realms like I have, they look very much like certain aspects of and regions of this realm, but like more polarized into that. If you understand what I'm saying here. But like getting back to how it like relates to now, like today, it's something all playing out on our own consciousness, because if we have different aspects of this all within our own biology, then it's all going on our consciousness as well, and all these different races and all the different factions within them have been at war with one another for some time. So this conflict is going on within us at the moment, and this is what most people don't realise, that it's not so much that it's out there anymore like it once was. It's more now going on within us, and how to deal with that is only actually you as an individual can actually understand it yourself and resolve it within yourself, because you can't resolve it. No one else can do that for you. But there's also the collective as well, the collective unconscious, which is also going on as well, not just within the individuals, but on a collective scale as well. And this is where the other races from the other dimensions can actually interfere, and then, like I said, harvest your own genetics and get them to, and pull you into their own sides and their own genders. And you can form certain alliances with these these certain factions and stuff like that, but you got to kind of keep to your own sovereignty as well, because you don't want to become a slave to their agendas and what they trying to accomplish, and for various reasons. So that's what I really wanted to say in this video. I know it's been kind of like a quite random on this one, but I kind of, like I said, wanted to make one of these types of videos because I haven't done it for a long time, and so I'll see you next time. Bye.